Howdy, howdy, chat. Producer Henry here, who for once had some technical issues and is why we are starting late today. Hope everybody's gotten over their case of the Mondays. We have a Wednesday coming up. Dr. Michael is in. He'll be with us in just a moment. Howdy, chat. Producer Henry here, apologizing for the disconnect. I'm having some technical issues, but we'll be with you in just a moment.
Hey, it's wow. Here we go. I think maybe we're back. Augie G says we're covering losers. I mean, here's the thing, let's just have, since the internet's having a breakdown, let me just have a performative psychological breakdown. Hey, Sean Harriman's here, and I like Sean because of his, what do we call it? User image emote? I always forget what to call these sorts of things. But hey, we're here. We're back. John, I did not take the 405 today. So I could have though. So you're not completely off. Or about Julia's here. That's great. Yeah, Icon. FunGPT is a Muslim who does not hate Jordan Peterson. That's cool. Who needs to hate anyone? John Kim says 666. We got to be there yet. Augie knows that we're so back. Avatar, yeah. Hopefully everyone's doing okay. Like the stream if you haven't. We're currently at a good relationship between likes and people watching. Justin, nice to see you. Sean, you should never change that icon. So we're here. Christy Murphy just popped in. Welcome to Christy and all of our members. We appreciate you. If you have a green username, it means you're going to heaven. I think that hate is bad. Bull Keen says, if you consider reaching out to Destiny for a convo, I'll be honest, we never really reach out to people like that. Like, we've had people on here. Let's think. We've had our friend Alice Capel on here before, a great YouTube host and content creator and author. We've had Udoya Travis on a couple times. I think what you will notice is that the people we've had on before, we had our homie Marianne Williamson on. Often when we have a guest on, it's not to debate, it's to talk to someone that we find interesting and who is like a good hang. I think part of the vibe of this show is that we're just like hanging out together. We're thinking about things together. We don't always agree with each other, but there's sort of like a shared circle of whatever. I don't really know. Sean membered up. We love it. Thank you, Sean. Daniel, what's up? Ty, what's up? Oh, Ty just got Alice's book in the mail. That's very awesome. It's a really great book. Alice is the best. So also too, I think that some of you, this is maybe a weird thing to say. I don't know like how to get, I don't know how to get in touch with some of these people, such that, what do I do? Do I DM them and say, hey, let's chat? I just don't like the yelling. And that's something about the debate. We're going to watch some of this today. I just don't like the yelling. And I think that, I got depressed yesterday when I was watching all of this debate because, so much of digital discourse that involves people who are perceived as smart it's so dumb. And, something that stood out to me, whoa, Amish Gramish gifting 5 memberships. We got a Lord of the Chat. All hail. But, the reason I watched, and the reason we're going to look at a little bit of this, watch a little bit of this debate or whatever, is because in the title, it was like streaming, politics, and philosophy. So I'm like, okay, we stream. We have no politics, but we like to talk philosophy. There's no substantive philosophical discussion in a 2-hour and 4-minute thing. It's just nuts. And it makes me realize that what a lot of people, Dude Abides is the man. Dude Abides is an alpha philosopher. You need to teach us. But I don't know, so yeah, let's see. Sean says, when Destiny actually debate intellectuals and not right-wing nutters, his only tactic is to start shit-slinging or debating positions you never made. Yeah, I watch. James Rowe says, Lord of the Chat. Yeah, whoever currently is gifted the most memberships is the Lord of our chat. It's a thing. Let's see. Steve says, okay, all the assumptions are dumb. Okay, well, there you go. We'll tweet at Destiny. We'll say, hey, Destiny, my name is Michael. It's cool that your parents named you Destiny. But my parents just named me Michael because they were boring Catholics. But, yeah, Amel, I said, why do people like to watch the debate videos? People just argue vicariously. So, yeah, I think that's the thing. We made a video about this. I just don't understand contemporary debate culture. Don't understand it. I like talking to people. I was thinking, what would if I was going to have a debate show, what would it be? And I don't want to be exclusive to only people that drink that alcohol. But for me, I'd really want to sit down with someone and have a beer. It could be non-alcoholic. They could drink a kombucha, an iced tea, a cold glass of cow milk, whatever they want. But I feel like I would need that energy. And I also feel like, and there's something Jordan Peterson says in this debate that maybe we'll look at. But, I think that, so let's say, for example, I'll just use people we've had on the stream before. It's not like I agree with everything that Alice Capel has ever said or written or put in a video. It's not like I agree with everything Udoya Travis has ever said in a video or a tweet or whatever. But what I do think is that both of those people, and again, let's throw in Marianne Williamson here, three most recent guest. These are people Oh, and Jay Singh Chaudhary, who had on recently as well. These are all people who, is this guy Michael saying anything? Why is he talking? I don't know. Why are you here? But I mean, genuine question. Like, why are you here? But I do think that having conversations with people where I know we're aiming at the same goal, I find productive. When we talk about debate culture, I don't really know what the point would be of having a debate or a discussion with someone who I know doesn't even share a bit of that trajectory. So, for example, what I wouldn't want to have as a conversation, and I'm not talking about Destiny here, it could be anyone. What I wouldn't want to have is a conversation that sort of boils down to like, this person's arguing for why, I don't know, some form of inegalitarian fascism or whatever. And then I'm going to be like, oh, here's why egalitarianism is good. I don't really like that. I don't want to like debate fundamental axiomatic positions like that. I'd be interested to talk to people who also want the world to be a better place, who also want the world to be more just, who think that art and creativity are valuable, who thinks that everyone deserves access to education and healthcare. I said access like a fucking lib, but you know what I mean? Like, if someone shares a general orientation, I would love to debate or share ideas about how we get there. And, we see this in Plato's Republic. When Socrates is having these early debates in that book, for those who have read it, you should read it if you haven't. They're talking about the nature of justice because they all at least have a fundamental agreement that there is a thing called justice and we should move towards that thing. But maybe I'm being a little, I don't know, Henry, do you get what I'm saying a little bit? We'll get into it in a second, but.
Yeah, I think it's being pointed out in the chat as well that the whole structure of debate is to kind of just turn it into a point system or a sports game or a versus system, where it's like who's scoring what on who and how can you reduce it to math. And I feel that's a mentality across the board as far as the reducing ethics and morals to like math and logic, so that you can like rationalize why like killing is wrong. When it's like, well, like what do you feel about it?
Yeah. Ty Dickerson says that book is so hard to read. Maybe you're referring to the Republic. I agree with you. Alain Badiou, French philosopher I like a lot, rewrote it. Bold move, right? To rewrite Plato in a more contemporary language. It's a little silly because at times it's like Sophie has her iPod and Socrates says blah blah blah. But yeah, Eric says Michael likes conversations, not debates. That's what I really think. Like, I'm not in high school. I don't have anything to win. Guys, like, I've already lost. I've already lost. What am I going to win? Gunsmoke says, so you only want to get people in your sphere. How will you get other people to listen to you? I don't know. I mean, I would say that there's people who I feel like watch the stream and our videos who I talk to who don't necessarily agree. But yeah, wait, Gary Davidson Earl says, have you ever thought about videos exploring the philosophy through music, album, genre? It's the thing I would love to do more than anything in the world, Garrett. Alexa, Alain Badiou, Alain. But Garrett, the reason we can't do that is because YouTube is so hard in terms of playing clips from albums, and I feel like it'd be really hard to have a video that talks about music where we can barely play the music. Is what I would think there. So okay, let's look at some stuff from this debate. So we're gonna jump around a bit. I took notes on this one. So let's start, and I think this is a relatively interesting point. I think I'll be close to where it starts here. Let me just see if I'm at the right point.
Like working poor position.
Oh, hold on. Why is my audio coming out of this? Oh man. Sorry, 1 second, guys. I don't want you to hear computer audio coming through my speakers. I finally got a newer computer via work, but then it does stuff weird. Output. Yes, this is my output. Let's see what happens now.
To making a lot of money,
Okay.
especially through the lens of my child. I saw how different life was.
Okay, I'm gonna rewind again. So at this point, Destiny is talking, and I'm gonna be honest. You know that I know who Jordan Peterson is. I'm not hyper familiar with Destiny. Here's the stuff I've known recently about Destiny: big defender of genocide and big defender of Kyle Rittenhouse. So for me, it's very funny when I know about this person that he's defended genocide and defended a teenager just shooting people. Doesn't seem like the most lefty thing. Wait, hold on real quick. trying to catch up on stuff. I think someone maybe said something about Patreon. Yeah. So, I mean, I truly am not saying this to try to get people to join Patreon. I mean, I'll try to do that later. If we got enough people on there, then I think we really could do things like music videos. And by music videos, not music videos where I record rap songs about the struggles that I experience, but videos where we break down music stuff. Lexa, you got to be invited to be on Nebula. I don't think Nebula is problematic, but it's like an invite only thing. And I also think it's because oh, we already hit 666. Satan. There you go. I mean, examples of genocide defense. He's not a defender of genocide, is he not? So what is? I guess I'm stepping into this. I thought in the clips I watched, Alley Cattails. Tell me, because you're the person I know who's saying this, who's in the chat regularly. A lot of other people are disagreeing with me, but I don't know them as well. So Alley Cattails, please tell me. So he didn't defend genocide. Yeah, Sean Harriman, who we know. Sean says Destiny said Israel could nuke Gaza and it wouldn't be considered genocide. That is the quote that I saw. And then someone's telling me now he didn't. He's a defender of Rittenhouse. He gets into it in this debate. He doesn't defend genocide. He just doesn't think Palestine versus Israel qualifies as genocide. But that's a weird way around it. Listen, we're not going to get into it. Old Greece, thank you so much. That's a weird way of avoiding saying that it's a genocide by just saying like, oh, well, I defend this thing, but this thing isn't a genocide.
That one doesn't count. Video.
Yeah. But here he said stuff in this debate conversation that I think is good and interesting. So let's start with this. I find this interesting because the thing we talk about here, because we don't do politics, we don't have any interest in politics, don't know anything about it, never voted. None of my 14 dads have ever taken me to the polls. But
we passed 777.
Oh, there we go. 777. Praise the Lord.
Bless your 14 dads.
Bless all of my 14 dads. I'm glad that people are here that have never been here before. Why is this guy talking about having 14 dads? Stick around and I'll explain. But he talks, Peterson kind of asked him how he became progressive. And he talks about how getting money made him more progressive, which is interesting because often people get money and get more conservative. Let's just start here.
Like working poor position to making a lot of money, especially through the lens of my child. I saw how different life was when I had more money versus less. And I guess like the differences between what was available to me and then my child as I made more money while I was really wealthy versus not as wealthy, it kind of started to change the way that I guess.
So you got more attuned to the consequences of inequality?
Jordan Peterson has a pirate jacket. I just want to say that Jordan Peterson has a pirate jacket. He has a jacket with a pirate thing on it. But I think this is interesting. I like that he acknowledges that he makes a lot of money. I think it's very weird sometimes when people on the internet who we know make a ton of money are weird about acknowledging, just to be real about it. But I respect that he gets at the idea that having more money, he sees the opportunities available for his child, which makes him realize that more people should be privy to those things. I do think that sounds like a, empathetic way to view stuff. I think a lot of times people get money and they start to think of reality as like, I'm the one with money. No one else can have my money. They don't get to have nice things. We'll keep going.
Basically, I would say.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Henry. Oh, my bad. I'm sorry. I thought I heard you talking. We got more lords of the chat. We hail our lords of the chat. Thank you so much. We love it. Yeah, the medicine stuff here is crazy. I feel like everyone in the chat's like defending Destiny. I haven't said anything bad about him yet. And if anything, I think most of the stuff he says in this is relatively reasonable, except the few things he says that are wild.
Yeah.
Okay. And so how did that lead you to develop more sympathy for left-leaning ideas?
And I think this is interesting too, that like Peterson's obsessed with breaking down the psychology of how one becomes a member of the radical left. Something they'll get at in this is, and this is the thing we've talked about in the videos on Peterson, his definition or lack of a definition of what counts as left or the radical left is really problematic. And because it's not a coherent definition, he's able to call anything that he doesn't like radical left. It's sort of like how now anything people don't like is because of DEI. After the bridge got hit in Baltimore yesterday, which really sucked. I've driven over that bridge, used to live in Baltimore, love that city, and really sucks and it's horrible that people lost their lives and got injured in that. But I saw someone immediately tweet like a joke about how DEI did it, and within an hour, people were actually saying that the boat hit the bridge because of DEI. And it's a similar thing where you come up with this weird conceptual boogeyman that you push everything that you don't like into. Now, someone might want to say, yeah, but isn't that what some people, let's say, who are more leftist do with capitalism? And I guess the only difference is there's like clear economic explanatory mechanisms that could tie various things to capitalism, where if you're going to tell me that like a plane door broke because of DEI, you're going to have to make a number of logical leaps to get there.
Ideas.
I guess my core beliefs have never really changed, but I think the way that those become applied kind of change. So much the same way that you might think that everybody deserves a shot to go to school and have an education. That might be like a core belief where as a libertarian or conservative, I might think that as long as a school is available, everybody's got the opportunity to go and study. But maybe now as like a liberal or progressive or whatever you'd call me, I might say, okay, well, we need to make sure that there's enough, maybe like food in the household or some kind of funding program to make sure the kid can actually go to school and study, basically. So like the core drive is the same, but I think the applied.
Weird too that anyone ever asked to debate the idea of whether or not it's a good political belief that everyone deserves to like go to school.
The applied principle ends up changing a bit based on what you think people's
So
individual
is your
sense are.
concern essentially something like the observation that if people are bereft?
How do you? So on the coat, I see that there's a pirate thing, and on the there's like a woman on it. Where does this guy get his jackets?
Enough of substance, let's say, that it's difficult for them to take advantage of equal opportunities, even if they are presented to them, let's say.
And as someone who's watched a lot of Peterson and finds his affect really off-putting, at this point in this debate, conversation, whatever, it's the first time I can imagine like what this guy was like when he was a practicing psychotherapist, in terms of like sitting back asking questions. Later he sits forward and yells.
Yeah, essentially.
And you have some belief, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have some belief that there is room for state intervention at the level of basic provision to make those opportunities more manifest.
Yeah, to varying degrees, yeah.
Okay.
Is there still someone in the chat who's talking about the Rittenhouse thing? I'll just respond to it so maybe you stop. Is he a defender of Rittenhouse, or do you only say that Rittenhouse wasn't in the wrong? Sure. If he said, let's just say that he said that Kyle Rittenhouse wasn't in the wrong. Let's Gunsmoke 02. It's funny that someone's name is Gunsmoke, is the one who's mad that I said, even if that is the case, I personally find that to be a pretty wild take from someone who says that they are leftist or progressive. I think saying that like it is okay that a 17-year-old can just blast off if he feels scared. I think that's maybe not the best take. And I think that you don't have to endorse Kyle Rittenhouse's politics, whatever they are, to say that. So now you can just stop asking that, and I'll just keep going. There you go. Someone says it looks like he spilled pancakes on his jacket. There you go. But yeah, so let's not. We don't got to talk more about Kyle Rittenhouse.
Okay. Okay. So let's start talking more broadly then on the political side. So, how would you characterize the difference, in your opinion, between the left and the conservative political viewpoints?
I'm curious in the chat what people think about this as well. I was interested in this conversation. I'm going to put Henry on the spot. Henry, what do you think is the difference between? Oh yeah, it's almost to 1,000. For those of you who are new, many of you here hate me.
I see 993.
All right, cool. Wait, someone said, what, Michael? Did you just say that even if Kyle Rittenhouse was in the right, that's a crazy view for someone on the left?
I see
No,
that
no,
we
no,
broke
no.
1,000.
Oh, cool. Dome time. Drudley, I didn't say that he's in the right. I said the view that he was in the right is a crazy view for someone on the left. So there you go. Hey, Wisecrack host is not a debater. I'm literally not a debater. And I'm going to say something spicy now. I'm not a debater. I'm just someone who's actually studied philosophy and political theory at quite a high level. I used to teach it at a university. I've written books and academic papers on it. So there you go. Like the stream if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. But yes, I'm not a debater. That is not a thing that I do. I analyze ideas, and I try to analyze them carefully. For those of you who don't know, Raw dome happens when I know, Mr. Cynic, you're right, but we got there so quickly. Raw dome happens when we get 1,000 concurrent. Because I'm a bald man and I always wear a hat in videos, and people are always like, "What's going on with him?" So there you go. But I do need to manscape this dome. What's up, Epoch Philosophy? A great channel, by the way. If you guys don't watch Epoch Philosophy or Epoch, I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong. Please go and subscribe now. Justin Cook says Michael has more qualifications than both the fools he's talking about. I know that qualifications aren't everything, but they do matter. I will say that. They do matter very much. Epoch Philosophy, you should come on the stream sometime. Speaking, we can debate. Come on and debate. It'll be fun. A dog formerly known as a cat, seen all 3 Raw Dome events live. Yeah, Epoch Philosophy is a great channel. I really, really like it. But again, let's get back into this. But I will just say, like, having qualifications doesn't make one instantly smart or whatever. But at least for me, like, I take everyone seriously, but I do, if someone has qualifications, if I'm like having a conversation with a friend and we're talking about science and technology, and one of my friends has a background in like science research, I am going to give them a little more leeway. So let's get back to this. I'm curious of people in the chat. What I was going to ask Henry is, how would you outline the difference between what it means to be like conservative or right wing and what it means to be progressive or left wing, if you had to put it as succinctly as possible? And I'm curious because I feel like this is a thing that it's hard to articulate, and I feel like so many contemporary cultural debates fall on this line. So I wonder what you're thinking.
I think there's a reactionary impulse to kind of like maintain or preserve what is, or double down on what is currently like accepted wisdom that sort of affects the right or thought to the right. And I think I don't know. I think it manifests as like really a fealty to capitalism. If I was gonna put it in any way, as far as like what's ruling us, what you can be traditional and beholden to in a reactionary and conservative sense, what's like allowed, and I don't know. I think a lot of liberals are reactionary in that sense, in the way that they're like not looking into like how Biden's totally ruining his reelection campaign, and like how the liberals don't go like more socialist or more towards just reimagining something new, instead of again that reactionary impulse to just kind of like keep the sitcom nuclear family model going.
Wow, Henry got very political there, guys. I don't understand what he said because I don't know about politics. Morbid Rex says, I consider left versus right to be hierarchy versus horizontal power structure. Bull Keen says, intro into philosophy, do you understand the difference between being morally right and legally right? I do. And in philosophy, unless you're like a legal philosopher, I think philosophy's concern isn't really with legality and more with what is morally or ethically right. I think at various points in human history, like even let's go back to one of the foundational texts of philosophy. You could say that it was legally correct that the state of Athens like punished Socrates to death, but it doesn't mean I have to take that seriously. So there you go. Someone said, can you repeat the question? No, I was just curious what people think the distinction is between left and right. Destiny's about to answer. It was interesting to hear Peterson ask that question. Every time I see the jacket, I just
on a very, very, very broad level, if there's some, I would say if there's some like good world that we're all aiming for, I think people on the left seem to think that a collection of taxes from a large population that goes into a government that's able to precisely kind of dole out where that tax money goes. You're basically able to take the problems of society. You're able to scrape off, hopefully, not super significant amount of money from people that can afford to give a lot of money, and then through government programs and redistribution, you target those taxes essentially to people that kind of need whatever bare minimum.
It's interesting because I think that's like an accurate description, maybe almost more like a real politic understanding of like the mechanisms there. I think it's also important, and Henry got at this, and people in the chat are getting at this, that one, I think it's important to still distinguish what, in this case, that system of taxation would be aiming at, or what, let's be nerdy about it, what like the teleology of that thing is, and why we're doing that. Again, that's not a criticism of that answer. It's just saying that I think it's an important side question or side qualification when they're defining the how without as much of the why.
To take advantage of opportunities in society. Yeah.
Okay.
And then on the conservative end, I guess a conservative would generally think that why would the government take my money? I think from a community point of view, through churches, through community action, through families, we can better allocate our own dollars to our own friends and family to help them and give.
Wait, someone said, I've been a fan of Michael's entire tenure, but the dismissal of people having an issue with reckless comments on issues he isn't familiar with is distressing. Wait, I'm confused what that means. The dismissal of people having an issue with reckless comments on issues he isn't familiar with is distressing. I'm curious what Ezekiel Reichart, what you're referring to, because if it is the stuff I said earlier about Kyle Rittenhouse, it's just that I was confused as someone who's not super familiar with Destiny in this debate when he says some things that are sort of at least in legal defense, let's say, of Kyle Rittenhouse. It took me aback. I hope that doesn't come off to you as unfairly reckless, but you say it's distressing to say the least. So I'm very sorry that you feel that way. But again, I haven't really said anything bad about him. And if anything, I kind of have just said nice stuff about him thus far. So let's all take a breath, okay? If you're here because you're a big Destiny head, no worries. I haven't said anything bad about your guy yet. I said there's a couple things he's talked about that I was a little thrown off by. But let's just give him a chance. You know, give me a chance and I'll give you a chance. Let's all do it together.
Give them the things that they need to better participate in and thrive in society, basically.
Okay, so one of the things that I've always found a mystery, I mean, I think there's an equal mystery on the left and on the right in this regard, is that the more conservative types tend to be very skeptical of big government, and the leftist types tend to be more skeptical of big corporations.
I guess that makes sense. The conservatives I mean, the interesting thing about that, and this is what I was thinking when I first heard this, is the idea that conservatives, and maybe this is the secret genius of modern conservatism, they're skeptical of big government, but they're also really good at using big government to do what they want. And that's always the thing I've been confused about of what conservatism means in a contemporary context. In that, on paper, it's a hatred of big government and not wanting government to have active control in people's lives, yet almost every contemporary issue or fighting point from American conservatives involves a level of control. So like controlling what information people have access to in school, controlling curriculums, controlling what healthcare services can be offered. And this is the thing I don't think is bad, but just as an example, Mr. Conservative Ron DeSantis is now, I think there's a new bill where in Florida you can't have social media or something until you're 14. But a lot of these things are mechanisms of control wielded through the government. So I'm just wondering what the examples are of a modern conservatism that do that. And then the idea that, people on the left would be skeptical of large corporations. I guess that seems true. But again, I think it would be the idea that like more progressive folks are skeptical of the way in which large corporations use money and influence to wield power in a non-democratic fashion or something like that. Let's keep going.
Right. Well, so following through the logic that you just laid out, you made the suggestion that one of the things that characterizes people on the left is the belief that government can act as an agent of can and should act as an agent of distribution. Okay. A potential problem for that is the gigantic.
I'll say this too. If you're a Destiny head, like if you're ahead of anyone, you should be able to critique them. Like, for example, I'm a huge Deadhead. I know my man Sean in the chat is as well, if he's still here. There's entire Grateful Dead shows that aren't very good. Even at the best shows, there's times where someone doesn't hit a part right or someone hits a wrong note. And that's okay, especially for someone like a Destiny or any sort of like a Hassan, anyone who's just talking extemporaneously all day. If you expect them to be right all the time, then you're just standing in a really unhelpful way that I imagine even they wouldn't want.
Gigantism of the government that does that. Now,
Is this a term that you are familiar with, Henry? Gigantism?
No.
Okay, because this is something that comes. There's a few terms, and we'll get into a few of these. There's a few terms that come up in this debate or conversation where I'm like, I have never heard someone use that term before. Now, I'm familiar with a, Well, I would say I read a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff.
Wasn't
That's just not something I've heard before.
wasn't that a Simpsons gag in the baseball players episode? One of them was drinking a formula that causes gigantism, and it just made him like big.
Yeah. Someone said I'm an uncharted. I mean, I'm not in uncharted waters in terms of like knowing what I'm talking about, but there you go. Um, how about this then? People are still. How about this? Let's just not talk about the two things I said such a long time ago. Let's just talk about this thing. You guys are being so annoying. Let's talk about it, okay? Um, pronunciation. Oh, I'm horrible at pronunciation. You've never watched this stream before. If you never watched our channel before, I'm like bad at pronunciation. I'm someone who will like, I've got to a high level of academia, and I'm just bad at pronunciation. I take speech classes when I was a kid. I'm not good at talking. Thus, this is my job.
Conservatives are skeptical about gigantism. And likewise, the
Gigantism.
liberals, the progressives in particular, we'll call them progressives, are skeptical of the reach of gigantic corporations. And I've always seen a commonality in those two, in that both of them are skeptical of gigantism.
I mean, this is interesting. Like, again, as someone who's watched a good amount of Peterson stuff, his vibe is so chill here. He's talking about how there's these similarities between different sides on the political, sort of bifurcated political spectrum, and which both are skeptical of large groups wielding power. It's like, okay, sure, Jordan.
And one of the things that I'm concerned about, generally speaking, with regard to the potential for the rise of tyranny, is the emergence of giants. And one potential problem
I'm like worried about Godzilla in particular.
with the view that the government can and should act as an agent of redistribution is that there is an incentive put in place, two kinds of incentives. Number one, a major league incentive towards gigantism and tyranny. And number two, an incentive for psychopaths who use compassion to justify their grip on power.
He's really into psychopaths. It comes up a bunch of times throughout this, but Jordan Peterson is very concerned about psychopaths. I'm not saying that in a good or bad way. Just concerned about psychopaths. You guys remember that movie Seven Psychopaths, the Martin McDonagh film? Talk about a movie that I wanted to be good that was not like him. I like almost everyone in that movie. It just didn't work, and that's fine.
Power to money and to claim that they're doing good. And I see that happening everywhere now, in the name of, particularly in the name of compassion.
Astronauta
It's one of the
Delvoid,
things
yeah,
that's
it'll be a
made me
VOD.
very skeptical, in particular about the left, and at least about the progressive edge of the left. So I'm curious about what you think about those two. First of all, it's a paradox to me that the conservatives and the leftists face off each other with regard to their concern about different forms of gigantism.
And he said this thing, I know I was kind of responding to someone's question about a VOD. He talks about the left using compassion as an excuse to gain power, which I find kind of interesting. Maybe we'll talk about that more later, but
And don't
yeah.
seem to notice that the thing that unites them is some antipathy. This is especially true for the libertarians, some antipathy towards gigantic structures per se. And so then I would say, with regards to your antithesis between liberalism and conservatives, the conservatives are pointing to the fact that there are intermediary forms of distribution that can be utilized to solve the social problems that you're describing, that don't bring with them the associated problem of gigantism. And like, it's been shocking to
I'm
me
going to pause in a second, but he says
to watch the left, especially in the last 6 years, ally itself, for example, with pharmaceutical companies, which.
So this is a point in which, again, it just seems clear that Jordan Peterson is kind of on some like weird right-wing Don Quixote stuff, because I mean, I'm curious if anyone in the chat identifies as at all progressive or leftist. Do you see yourself as someone who has ideologically aligned yourself with the pharmaceutical industry? Like, is that a thing when you go to your like leftist meetings, you go to your Marx reading group or something? Are you all sitting around, talking about, how you're getting Merck and Pfizer tattoos and how the revolution is going to start there? Yeah, John says leftist here. We hate pharma. Yeah, we started with Raw Dome, kids. I'll just say this because I think there are some new people here. Hi, this is Wisecrack Live. I'm Michael Burns. I'm here with producer Henry. We do this every Wednesday. We also stream on Mondays. We have a Patreon community you can join where we have extra videos on philosophy and stuff like that. If you are a big philosophy head and you want to talk more about nerdy issues. A lot of that happens over on Patreon. It also helps support us because, the more we're on Patreon, Logan says they start every meeting with Hail Pfizer. The more, friends we have on Patreon, the less we have to rely on all of our pharmaceutical sponsorships. But again, so this is a small sample size, but in the chat right now, people, some of whom, people are still talking about this. How about this? I'm willing to take back the claim that Destiny is a defender of genocide, and I will go back, I will watch clips that I was sent from the debate he did with Finkelstein, and I will absolutely 100 times over take back that claim if I misstated it. Now that I said that, I really hope we can just move forward. We have a really great chat, and I would love all our new friends to just be cool with people in the chat because we have a cool chat. So let's just all be cool. Everyone just be cool. Shot says, personally love pharmaceuticals. Great companies. Yeah, like the stream if you want. I wonder if it's getting disliked a bunch by the people that are mad that I said something. I don't know. Update your YouTube front page. I'm curious what that means as well. Okay. So yeah, I think that's a weird thing. I think that when Jordan Peterson says the left gave power to pharmaceutical companies, I mean, obviously what he's saying is there was a leftist conspiracy during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic to develop and distribute a vaccine, and that leftist lined up to support those companies. And Destiny brings this up in a way that's it's fun, which we'll maybe watch. I mean, it's fun that at least in America, the sort of vaccine project was all initially funded and spurned forth by Donald Jamila Trump. But
yeah,
neither here nor there.
The straw man of the left likes big pharma because of the vaccines. No, the reason we criticize the big pharma industry is because they take things that work and they paywall them.
Yeah. It's wild. Yeah. So I think that, and also there's a distinction there that I think that one could say, I support or am in support of pharmaceutical developments backed by science and research that benefit the lives of human beings. I think you can say that without being yeah, your boy fucks heavy with pharmaceutical companies. It's not like when I take an Advil to help when I have a headache, I'm not thank you, Mr. Advil and your parent corporation, I would die at your altar. It's more thanks to the science guy in a lab at one point who put some shit together that made a pill to make me feel better. But he'll talk a lot more about this because some of the stuff I do want to look at is comments on the relationship between pharmaceuticals and politics, and the stuff on environmentalism is crazy. And guys, for those of you who think I'm an idiot, I brought a book with me today because a book that I'm reading, it was crazy. As I'm reading this, it has a bunch of things that directly contradict some claims that our man Peterson says. And if you're here to get mad at me again, I'm mostly here because I think Peterson's ridiculous and he says ridiculous things. And I think because he has a big influence, it's important sometimes that we point out the ridiculousness of those things.
What was something I'd never thought I would see in my lifetime. I mean, for decades, the only gigantic corporations the left was more skeptical of than the fossil fuel companies were the pharmaceutical companies. And that all seemed to vanish.
And to a lot of left-leaning people and even liberal left politicians in America have been hella critical of the pharmaceutical industry for patenting vaccines. So I think that's a direct criticism of those places. Shout out to members. We love that you're here. Let's see. Yeah, Sean said, I'd be a pharma stand if insulin was actually $1 like it was supposed to be. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Make insulin free, guys. And lick your local scientist. If you're here, like the stream if you want. But yeah, let's all focus. I feel like that's one thing that Wisecrack heads and Destiny heads can all agree on, right? We probably don't really love Jordan Patricia Peterson. So let's just, let's find a common ground there.
Overnight around the time. So
around
I know
I like how he calls
a
it
lot
the
of things
COVID
to throw
time
at you, but it sort of outlines the territory that we could probably investigate.
I mean, it's just interesting too, why and again, this is me criticizing Peterson because he's driving this conversation right now. It's just weird that that's a thing that this like super smart man who knows everything and cares about everything cares about so much. Well, we're gonna skip ahead in a second. He gets to something in a bit that I think is like beautiful. It's like chef's kiss, one of those beautiful things I've ever heard Jordan Peterson say. So let's get to that.
Productively.
Yeah, so a couple things. I would say that the current political landscape we have, I think, is less. I understand the concept of conservatives supporting corporations and liberals supporting like large government. I think today the divide we're starting to see more and more is more of like a populist, anti-populist rise, or even like an institutional or anti-institutional rise. So, for instance, I think conservatives today in the United States are largely characterized with, I would say, with populism. In that they're supporting like certain figures, namely right now Donald Trump, who they think alone can kind of like lead them against the corrupt institutions, be them corporate or government. I feel like most conservatives today are not as trustful of big corporations as they were back in like the Bush era, where we would, conservatives would champion.
Oh, I do want to say, Hound Report said, "Don't mean to derail. You're not derailing. I'm curious about your opinion on rent civic republicanism and whether you consider it reactionary." Honestly, I'm not as familiar off the top of my head, Hound Reports, and maybe like ask me again later, or I'll try to think about this next week. I just want to make sure that I do not speak out of my ass right now because I've already gotten a little busted for speaking out my ass today. Avocado Loco, happy hump day to you as well. Again, thanks for being here. We're watching some of this Peterson and Destiny debate because what else are we going to do? We're all living, on a planet that's becoming the Titanic. So let's enjoy the way down.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. I don't
That's
think
a
there's-
strange thing because it makes the modern conservatives a lot more like the 60s leftists.
He said modern conservatives are a lot more like the 60s leftists. Now we're thinking about the 60s leftists. Let's think about what that means. In France, you have Paris 68 and students and workers getting together to revolt against sort of, for lack of a better term, the machinations of late industrial capitalism and the way they were affecting people's lives. So I don't know how much that has to do with the modern conservative. In America, you of course have like the Black Panthers and the Weather Underground, and Students for Democrat. What is it? Students for I'm gonna get it wrong.
The SDS, the Students for a Democratic
SDS, yeah.
Society, and the
Yeah, Students for Democratic
Symbionese
Society.
Liberation Army. Yeah, all
Yeah.
the left-wing militias.
Yeah, but like I don't see a ton of similarities between the modern conservative and those groups because again, none of those groups were arguing for like a return to anything. They weren't arguing none of them were arguing about like ethno-nationalism or anything like that. There was a pretty unifying spirit. And I do think one of the big divides in the 60s was probably the means by which one would get there. I think most folks that were a part of radical movements in the 60s wanted some sort of dismantling of capitalism. There was critiques of hierarchy, patriarchy, all these sorts of things, and a unified cause to build a society that was grounded more in an egalitarian and just spirit. And of course, in San Francisco, you had people that thought all that and they wanted to do acid and fuck their friends' wives. But not a lot of that goes along with the modern conservative movement, which makes me think that Jordan Peterson doesn't understand the modern conservative movement other than to say people that are in it pay his bills. And he definitely doesn't understand what leftism was in the 60s. Again, 1960s leftism is largely informed, like incredibly philosophically informed by the sort of Marxist and post-Marxist milieu. And if you look back, especially in France, like a lot of the French philosophers we read and talk about today were either active participants in or at least students during, May 68 and some of those movements over there. So there's a pretty strong connection between, progressive critical, ideologically critical philosophy and those movements. And you have a similar thing in the States, not to the same level. So just one of my favorite all-time Peterson things. So shouts to Uncle Jordan.
Potentially, yeah.
But then when Destiny says potentially, yeah, I'm like, really?
I mean, that brings us into the issue, too, of whether the left-right divide is actually a reasonable way of construing the current political landscape at all.
Listen, I agree that the left-right divide is not a good way of construing the political landscape. So you know what? We gotta agree with him when he says something in that beautiful jacket. That's correct. It's not a, and I'll tell you this, everyone who's obsessed with that dichotomy are the folks who are losing their minds.
And I'm not sure it.
Right now, it kind of is, but only because so many conservatives are following Trump. So, like, your populist, anti-populist thing kind of maps on kind of cleanly to the left and right. It doesn't work with progressives, though, or the far left, because they're also anti-large everything. So, in a surprising way, on very, very far left people, you might find them having a bit more in common with kind of like a MAGA Trump supporter than like a center-left liberal.
I guess there's like a weird logic to that, because like, wasn't there that weird moment in like around maybe 2020 where some people on the far right were like almost starting to like critique capitalism? And I feel like there was like a trend for a while where people were retweeting folks who were MAGA-ish, who were making points that were super adjacent to more of a radical left position. So maybe that's what he's getting at there.
So, for instance, like both of these groups of people on the very far left will be very dovish on foreign policy, probably a little bit more isolationist. They're not a big fan of like a ton of immigration.
That's one thing I definitely, and I'm not disagreeing with the gentleman with great hair, by the way. I've never really encountered people on the far left who like are staunchly against immigration or things like that. Have you come across folks like that, Henry?
No, a lot of the people I know who are left leaning pretty much want like the bureaucratic system to work as advertised. It's not like destroy the system, it's like make it functional. I think there's a recognition that like technologically like we're at a size of civilization that needs a macro structure. It's just a matter of like making it like an ethical and smooth moving one.
Yeah. I don't know the context. I see maybe Callahan talking about the Panthers and stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, the most important thing the Panthers did was serve breakfast to children. And I mean that in a positive way.
I do remember
Thanks so much.
a few years ago, Amon Bundy saying nice things about the Black Lives Matter movement. Amon Bundy
know.
being not the free citizen person against
Yeah.
out in the Southwest Nevada area, the people that will regularly like they don't like the Bureau of Land Management.
Yeah. Yeah, but speak just in case I didn't see the whole context of Maeve's conversation. Wait, James Burrows says Wisecrack, update your YouTube page. I swear it's driving you crazy. James, what's wrong with it? I'm so confused. Tell me what's wrong. I don't want you to be crazy, James. I want you to feel good. I want all of you to feel good. Even those of you who are here that don't like me, fuck it, I still want you to feel good. James, please let us know what's wrong with our YouTube page. I want to fix it too. So I'm gonna get back to watching the thing, but please let me know. And I'll say this too, just another thing. I feel like I got to suck up to some of you here that I don't know as well. I, especially later in this, when JP starts to lose his gosh darn mind, I love how composed Destiny stays.
Or a ton of countries. They might think that there's a lot of institutional capture of both government and corporations. So both all of the MAGA supporters and the far, far left might think that corporations don't have our best interest at heart and the government is corrupt and captured by.
We're going to watch a few more minutes before I skip ahead because we got to get to the part only because it's relative to a recent video where Catholicism comes up and JP starts to snap.
Lobbyists. You'll see a lot of overlap there.
Right.
I think that sometimes there's a couple things. One, this is something I feel like I've discovered. People have no principles. I think that people are largely guided by whatever is kind of satisfying them or making them feel good at the time. I think that's a really important thing to understand because people's beliefs will seem to change at random. If you're trying to imagine that a belief is coming from some underlying principle or is governed by some internal, like moral or reasonable code or whatever, I think generally there are large social groups and people.
So I think this is interesting. I'm curious what people think about this. So he draws a distinction here and says that rather than political beliefs being driven by internal principles, they're largely shaped, and we'll keep watching this. So this is my summation of what he says. I probably won't get it completely correct. That our political views and values are more shaped by communities in which we participate than they are in the sort of contemplation of ideas. Now, coming at this from at least a vaguely philosophical perspective, I know that I think I'm very like Aristotelian in the way where I think that we arrive on virtuous principles by participating in contemplation about ideas, about concepts, arriving at a nice medium position and having that be the thing that informs our actions and our ethics. So I think that ideally contemplation is incredibly important. I also think as like a Kierkegaardian that ideas don't matter if they don't facilitate subjective action, which is also in line with stuff that Aristotle says. So, in hearing that, I'm like, maybe I'm just too ideal because I know a thing we talk about on the stream sometimes is that we don't have a politic and we don't know anything about politics. Again, I have 14 dads and I've never voted. Is that we do operate with some shared principles. And I was talking to someone in the comments on a YouTube video about this yesterday or the day before, but I think it's that like we value empathy, think that everyone deserves to have a good life and that things should be structured such that everyone has a fundamental right to, education and healthcare and leisure time and all that sort of stuff. And for me, at least, it's really important that there are principles like that that then facilitate thinking. And I don't know about you all in the chat. I'm curious about this. I think sometimes that like maybe the risk of a community, I guess the risk of having a way of thinking about culture, society, politics that revolves around participation in a community means, of course, that as the community shifts, you could get caught up in a tide, whereas having a set of foundational principles and axioms helps. This is something I've talked about before. I know I've mentioned him already today, but French philosopher Alain Badiou, who if anyone out here is like, I want to read a book on like political philosophy, read like, oh, Brian with the 5 memberships. Thank you so much. Lord of the chat. We love to have more lords. We're a very theological community. Gifting memberships is just a fucking fun thing to do. I love it. It makes me happy. I like to see all the green stuff. But I would recommend reading Badiou's either his book Ethics or his Manifesto for Philosophy, 1 or 2, if you want to do something like that. Listen, I would have Hassan on, but Hassan's all famous and big, and he streams all day. Hassan though, and I mean Sean might know this. The one thing I have in common with Hassan is that we both, at least at points, he had a proclivity for online ceramic shirts, which are t-shirts made by some deadheads. But let's get back to it because I think that's an interesting idea, and I think it's one for me. And someone said this in the chat that maybe I am a little too ideal in thinking that folks all have time to contemplate. And I know as well, there's times where I have seen like someone who's a cultural figure or, an influencer in a space that's adjacent to the culture and societal ideas I find interesting, say something. And sometimes we can get caught up in that maybe. What do you think about that distinction, Henry?
I'm honestly a bit empty-headed right now. I'm monitoring chat, kind of having to throw people in timeout.
Shit, yeah, I'll let you keep doing it.
I was a little lost on the question.
No worries at all. Wait a second. I'm just like catching up on chat. Is one of our old friends in here? Is one of the people who is foundational to starting this stream in here? I can't tell. I feel like I saw their name mentioned. If they're here, they know who they are, and I appreciate them. Let's get to 1666. That would be sick. But yeah, interesting distinction. And if that is true, no, K-pop girl, I love that Wisecrack watches our channel. It makes me happy, even though, yeah. And someone said, yeah, let's not talk about Hassan versus Destiny, whatever. Like, who cares? Let's just be here. Let's just all be here together. Let's stay imminent to this discussion. I didn't come for anyone's community. I just want to hang out. Okay, Brian said, don't read chat. It's hell in here. Okay, I'm going to take a break from chat. Henry's going to moderate chat. But know that I love you.
Get back
kind
to
of
the
follow
video.
along from thing to thing, which is why you end up in strange worlds sometimes where, like the position on vaccines and being an anti-vaxxer might have been seen as something, 10 years ago as kind of like a hippie leftist. And now maybe it's more like a conservative or...
I mean, that is like such a great point as well, that historically the most anti-vax people, like think about we did a video about this a few years ago. I mean, the anti-vax movement that started for school kids totally started with a bunch of Los Angeles hippie rich leftist types. So yeah, it's I think it's important to remember that that's kind of the roots of the anti-vax movement. And I think that like early on post COVID, when vaccines started rolling out, I know a lot of the discourse was sort of like, oh, these rural American hillbillies are the ones not taking the vaccine. And I was like, guy, I know some people in Los Angeles who make a lot of money who are definitely not conservative, who absolutely have not taken that vaccine because they're West Coast hippies.
It's associated more with like Trump supporters or whatever. I think as a result of how the social groups move around. When it comes to you mentioned this like gigantism thing. That's another thing where I'm not sure if people actually care about gigantism or if they're using it as a proxy for other things that they don't like. Like I could totally imagine
Well, I care about it.
Sure, yeah, you might. Yeah, sorry. It just
That's
meant
okay.
in general.
That's
Yeah.
okay.
I love his reactions.
Because like I could imagine somebody saying that like they don't trust like a large government, they think there's too much prone to tyranny or something like that, but also be supportive of an institution like the Catholic Church, which is literally one guy who has a direct
Right,
line to
but they
God.
can't tax.
So this is fun. This is fun right here. Destiny brings up the folks that hate government gigantism might still like the Catholic Church. Although I think in America, it's way less the Catholic Church that a lot of those people are into and like evangelical Christianity. But the church has enormous power and enormous political power and enormous economic power as well. Because even though the church doesn't tax, obviously as citizens, as sovereign citizens of the United States of America, we get taxed whether we like it or not. But as participants in certain forms of religion, especially Christianity, there is a sort of implied moral tax called tithing that a lot of people get caught up in. This isn't the place to get deep into that, but there's some great documentaries on it. But the church in America has immense economic and political power.
Well, I mean, there's
And they don't have a military.
that
And
is
they can't
That's not true. The Vatican has what are they? The Swiss guards or whatever. That counts.
conscript you.
And also, they don't have a military. I don't know. I was going to go down a rabbit hole that I'm not going down.
true.
Right.
Yeah.
And they can't throw you in jail.
Oh, and his other big thing is conscription. It seems like Jordan Peterson is very concerned that the government is going to conscript people and throw them in jail. Also, a lot of stuff he's saying about the Catholic Church, he should Google crusades plus what?
Jail.
That is, I mean,
Right. Well, those are major and significant. I mean, I get the overlap. Don't get me wrong.
sure. But I'm saying like even if you had a local government, like if you had a state government or a tribe, usually they've got some form of enacting punishment. It'll be sometimes more brutal, but they can throw you in jail. Conscription hasn't existed in the U.S. since the Vietnam War.
Yet.
I mean, yeah.
Yet. Is there, again, maybe someone in the chat knows this, even though I'm not allowed to look in the chat, and the chat is making Henry lose his mind, so I'm very upset with you for that, guys. I haven't heard of conscription coming back in quite some time.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, true.
So yeah, I think that I guess when I look at
So this is let's go back. Well, let's go back to to the redistribution issue.
Mhm.
I mean,
I want to get through a little of the economic stuff in the next few minutes, so we'll stick here, and then we're going to jump ahead to the environmental stuff, because Daddy Jordan has a lot to teach us about the environment, and I'm really excited to get to that point so then I can pull out a book I'm reading about this stuff and talk about it. Again, it's 11:10. It's Wisecrack Live. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Michael Burns. I'm here with producer Henry, who today is Chat Daddy, who's a gigantic force of moderation and is fighting against free speech in the chat. I do not condone the way that Henry is attacking you.
Mass literacy was a mistake.
Yeah. But truly, Old Greece says, speaking of going down holes, I know. But yeah, thanks to Henry for that. Top 10 Crusades, number 6 will blow your mind. Spooky Bees, that's great. See, I looked at the chat for a second. I'm sorry. That was good. Why is someone still talking about the one thing? Why is someone still doing the thing? Someone's still talking about the thing. Just stop talking about that one thing. We already talked about it. And I was already like, hey, we'll get into it later. My bad, whatever. And you're still talking about it. Just stop. I know, I've become a dad sometimes. I become a dad. But when you have 14 dads, you learn how to dad.
we pay 65% of our income at, say, upper middle class to upper middle class level in Canada. It isn't all.
if Julia's still hanging out, which maybe she left because the chat was bad vibes, and I get it. Let us know if you have thoughts on any of his Canadian-centric analysis
Obvious to
here.
me at all that money is well used. In fact, quite the contrary. In my country now, our citizens make 60% of, they produce 60% of what you produce in the US. That's plummeted over the last 20 years as state intervention has increased. I'm not convinced that.
I mean, the idea that production is down in Canada due to state intervention is really weird as well, because production is down in most of the West because of the outsourcing of production to the global South.
The claim that the interests of people who lack opportunity are best served by state intervention. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, first of all, I'm aware of the relationship between inequality and social problem. There's a very well-developed literature on that, and it essentially shows that the more arbitrary, the broader the reach of inequality in a political institution of any given size, the more social unrest. So where all people are poor, there isn't much social unrest, and
where all people are poor, there isn't much social unrest. I don't know. I don't want to be too anecdotal here, but when you look at a country that has some of the worst overall poverty on the planet, like Haiti, I don't know. Reports normally aren't like, and everything's chill in Haiti, you know?
where all people are much social unrest, but when there's a big gap between the two, there's plenty, and that's mostly driven by disaffected young men.
It always comes back to disaffected young men. So the reason for contradictions in class inequality and reactions to class inequality is disaffected young men. Guys, come on, disaffected young men in the chat. Is that how you feel?
Who aren't very happy that they can't climb the hierarchy. There are barriers in their way. And so there is reason to ameliorate relative poverty. The problem with that, to some degree, is that most attempts to ameliorate relative poverty tend to increase absolute poverty, and they do it dramatically.
A thing you notice as well, and this is something we've talked about before in Peterson videos, and it's really similar to, so last week, for anyone who wasn't here last week, we were watching the Don Lemon and Elon Musk interview, and the thing that Elon likes to do is just sort of cite like facts in a very absolute way without really referencing anything else. And Peterson does a lot of this, and the angrier he gets in this, the more he like cites studies and says things are absolutely true.
And the only solution ever been able to develop to that is something approximating a free market system.
So the only solution to inequality we've ever been able to develop is a free market system.
I wouldn't call it a capitalist system because.
And then he says free markets are not capitalist. This seems to me indicative of the disconnect of. I feel like maybe people are starting to view people more on the right critiques of capitalism as a critique of larger right-wing social, cultural, and political values, such that he now wants to try to disconnect the free market from capitalism. But capitalism, in its most reductive sense, of course, is an economic structure that prioritizes the accumulation and growth of capital. A free market, in many ways, operates along the same principles. Because what is, Adam Smith's invisible hand of the market, other than the principle of capital accumulation and growth? So, in a very literal sense, it seems that a free market is a capitalist market, and in most cases, a capitalist market is a free market. So I'm interested in the psychology of why he would want to distinguish those two, or why he would want to try to say that a free market isn't necessarily a capitalist market. But shouts to everyone, we're just here to love. We're just here to love each other and be hella positive. And again, Fun GVT says, stop being a disaffected young man. Listen, as the oldest member of Gen Z, sometimes I do get disaffected.
Because I think that's capture of the terminology by the radical leftists. It's a free exchange system.
Oh, okay, so he says it. So capture the terminology of the radical leftists. So he thinks it's radically left to say that the free market economy is capitalist. It's a weird mechanism in which we're turning anti-capitalism into some larger attack on his values or something like that. Let's see. I'm trying to decide how far we're going to go here. I think maybe we'll stop before he gets into talking about the Soviets. Peterson gets so jacked up about that. Let's keep going.
The price you pay for a free exchange system is you still have quality, but the advantage you gain is that the absolute levels of privation plummet. And I think the data on that I think they're absolutely conclusive. Especially, and that's been especially demonstrated in the radical decrease in rates of poverty since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, because we've lifted more people out of poverty in the last 4 decades than we had in the entire course of human history up to that date. And that's not least because the statist interventionist types who argued for a radical state-sponsored redistribution lost the Cold War, right? And that freed up Africa to some degree, and certainly the Southeast Asian countries, to pursue something like a free trade economy. And that instantly made them rich, even China. So that's an argument, let's say, on the side of free exchange, but it's also an argument, a twofold argument, pointing out how we ameliorate absolute poverty, which should be a concern for leftists, but doesn't seem to be anymore, by the way.
Another thing he says, that ameliorating absolute poverty should be a concern for leftists, but doesn't seem to be anymore, by the way. Again, in my experience as a non-political person with 14 dads, I sometimes hang out with or am around people who would be leftist. If you listen to their concerns, I would say more often than not, they're either directly about poverty or tied into that. Because what are big concerns for people who I think would be considered politically left? Housing, right? Well, that's an issue of poverty. People can't afford housing or they're homeless because of that. So that's a poverty-related issue. Obviously, access to healthcare. You can't have healthcare if you're very poor in this country. I think education ties into that as well. There's a lot of, and this isn't even like a left thing, but there's people who are libertarians who are into the idea of universal basic income as a mechanism for ameliorating poverty. There's a lot of discussions, at least in just like the left liberal politicians in America, of increasing tax rates, which are precisely aimed at the amelioration of, if not poverty, the effects of it. And of course, people that want things like child tax credits or universal pre-K, these are all things that are offering services to people that are at or around the poverty line. So I think it shows us, again, if we can kind of psychologically analyze what's happening here as a bunch of psychologists, that Jordan Peterson and people in his world have constructed this sort of, leftist boogeyman that just like hates their like culture and wants them to use pronouns or something like that. And, focusing on all these cultural things, or what we might call superstructural issues, just distract from the actual material and economic analysis taking place by people who actually care about this stuff. And there's not really a lot of discussion about the material and economic side of these things, which isn't fun. Again, hello to everyone in the chat. Like the stream if you want. Up yours, woke moralist. Oh, Vinny, I just saw in the chat, says he hadn't said bloody yet. Yo, Vinny, there's so much blood coming. It's about to be a bloody bath at how much he starts saying it.
The way, and also an argument for the maintenance of a necessary inequality. Like, I'm not sure that inequality can be decreased beyond a certain degree without that decrease causing other serious problems. And we can talk about that, but it's a complicated problem.
Yeah, for one point of clarification, when you say leftist, what do you mean by
This is a good question. But then he does a very Peterson thing.
that?
Well, I was going with your definition, like essentially the core idea being something like the central problem being one of relative inequality in distribution of resources, and the central solution to that being something like state-sponsored economic intervention. I mean, there's other ways we could define left and right, and we can do that. But, I'll stick with the one that you brought forward to begin with.
Gotcha. Okay. I only want to be clear on that because people get mad if I call myself a leftist. Oftentimes online or especially in Europe or worldwide, leftists will refer exclusively to like socialists or communists, and anybody to the right of that would be considered like a liberal.
I think that's a good distinction, to be honest. I think that being left implies a certain level of economic analysis that would largely be exclusive of free market economics, and anything to the side of that would be liberal.
If you
No,
believe, like, the
usually just
well,
and
depending on who you're talking
very
about, yeah.
rapidly.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I just wanted to be
Peterson's starting to get
clear
mad.
on that. So I'm absolutely a pro-capitalist, pro-free market guy. I'm never gonna.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. It's good to get that clear. Why?
Yeah.
I'm not going to comment on Destiny saying that he's a pro-capitalist free markets guy. It is the thing that he said. I'm not commenting on it in any way, shape, or form. It is a thing that this person said. That's all.
Because I would argue that when you look at like the fall of the Soviet Union, or you look at the failure of like socialist or communist regimes.
Okay, let's skip ahead a little bit to when they get into the environmental stuff, which gets pretty wild. Let me make sure I'm getting these time codes kind of right. So let's see. I'm going to kind of like summarize a little bit just to help in the 10 minutes that we're skipping ahead on. They get into carbon offsetting, climate stuff, and a thing that Peterson gets up that he gets into is this idea that it's a conundrum for the left that carbon taxes make energy more expensive, and that more expensive energy ends up hurting the poor. So that's a big JP thing that he gets into. So we'll watch a little bit. I actually want to turn to a book for a second. And I know this makes me a bad online content maker that I'm going to refer to a book. So apologies in advance.
Planet could well be the remediation of absolute poverty, and the best route to that is cheap energy. And we're interfering with the development of cheap energy by.
Oh, I saw someone comment on the command economy of it. Truly, if we had time, I would get through the whole thing. I'm trying to jump around a bit, but you're totally right. There's there's interesting stuff all throughout this.
Meddling with the hypothetically detrimental externality of carbon dioxide. And so I think this is a complete bloody travesty, by the way.
Bloody.
We are putting the lives of hundreds of millions of people
Mm-hmm.
directly at risk right now.
So his claim, to be clear, is that by having carbon offset taxes and making energy potentially more expensive, what that is doing is causing direct damage to the lives of the poor, in particular people in the global south. And we're going to skirt past the point that it's been shown in many cases that carbon offset taxes don't really work. We had a pilot for a show we tried to make a while ago called Wisecrack Labs that was hosted by our friend Helen Flourish. That you can find on our YouTube page if you search Wisecrack Labs. That's precisely about this, where we interviewed a leading climate scientist from Stanford University, real guy, real science guy that gets into this. But you can check that out if you want. But that's kind of the stake of the discussion here. Of course, we also know, if you pay attention to this sort of stuff, what most people will predict, most people in the science and climate community, is that the biggest risk to people in the global south and impoverished places isn't rising energy cost, it's rising oceans and heating oceans. And we know already that most of the places that are set to be most badly hit by the effects of climate change are places where poor and vulnerable people already live. So it's an interesting reframing he does here. Great jacket.
To hypothetically save people in the future, depending on the accuracy of our projections, 100 years out. And these interventionists, these people who are remediating externalities, they actually believe that they can calculate an economic projection 1 century out. That's utterly delusional.
So, okay, so just to be clear, the first thing, I was just giving an example of how you can use like a government intervention to make a free market track something, which is what cap and trade or like carbon taxes would do. I wasn't necessarily.
I want to skip ahead a little bit, and this isn't to skip. We're not trying to not give respect to y'all's man Destiny, but I want to keep it moving because it's a really long conversation. So they kind of keep on the climate thing for a while. Peterson makes some pretty bold claims about economic and environmental predictions. So let's watch a little bit more of that. And I might have to skip a part where he says something that'll make you guys mad. Okay, let's keep going.
is going to be short term and far less than the long term pain and suffering.
Right, but
that
that's
comes
Oh yeah, and Destiny made the point there that even if there's negative effects to carbon offset taxing and things like that, the short-term negative effects will be balanced by the long-term positive effects of slowing down climate change.
along
dependent
with
on the integrity of the economic models and
the climate models as well, right?
Right, exactly,
Of course,
but is in exactly the stacked manner that I described. And like, there's nobody in 1890 who could have predicted what was going to happen in 1990 economically.
I think that's a funny point. I'm not an ideological guy, but the idea that there's no one in 1890 who could predict what would happen in 1990 economically. I will say the reason why people still talk about, you know, Carl Anthony Marx is that he makes predictions about the consequences of industrial capitalism, leading into predictions about technology, automation, efficiency that are wild. That, you know, people that are moderate or conservative economists or people that work in finance read Marx precisely because of the predictive accuracy of that analysis. So the idea that it is insane that someone in 1890 could say that, well, if you're doing a structural economic analysis, well, then it's not, because you see material pieces and structures at play, and you can say with some level of accuracy how that's going to unfold down the road. And if you go back and read books by various more critical or leftist figures in economics and philosophy from years ago, and this is something that really surprised me when I first started reading this stuff, is a lot of it is like, oh my God, how did they know that? This is going to be a shameless plug for our Patreon, but I posted a video on our Patreon last week where I did a little reading from one of my favorite books by my favorite philosopher, Soren Kierkegaard. And Kierkegaard in 1842, 1844 is predicting the way in which a media-based economy and marketplace is going to affect us. And he says things that are accurately describing what's happening now. Now, is it a fully fledged economic analysis of, the market 100 years in advance? Absolutely not. But when we think about things from a structural point of view, we actually are able to talk about some of this, and it's similar with the scientific models that he also hates.
Not a bit, not a bit.
Getting mad.
And if we think we can predict like 50 years out now with the current rate of technology and calculate the potential impact of climate change on economic flourishing for human beings, we're deluded. No one can do that. And then,
Wait, did someone just say, when did he lose his hair? Is he okay? About me? I'm notoriously bald, guys. Okay, I'm notoriously bald. And I started going bald very young. If you guys would like, we can just, Arendt and Marcuse are great. Christopher Pierce said I went bald when I looked at today's chat. Yeah, I had gorgeous hair. Somehow there was already a bald emote of me ready to go. Yeah, the notorious BALD. If we get to 16666, I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be crazy. But yeah, I hope everyone's doing okay. And I just hope that anyone who's, feeling attacked or angry or whatever, the internet's a little wild, and we see these little names and we're like, this isn't a person. Like, FunGPT, that's not a government name. John Chu, who is that? Dare, Natasha, Amish, Avocado, JJ Carter. What are these words even mean? But it's just important to remember that I assume that most people are just like real people. We get heated sometimes because we care, but isn't that great that we get heated because we care about stuff? We care about ideas. We're here right now because we care enough to engage with each other. We care enough to get passionate about ideas because maybe we want the world to be better than it is right now. So I think that's pretty cool. And some of you, Dead Card gifted 5 memberships, like Dead Card right there. That's a real person behind that name. And he just said, fuck it. I'm going to spend some of my money to gift some memberships to just like hang out and vibe in here. I think that's pretty neat. So, just a reminder. I didn't always used to be a positive hippie, but I'm getting there, and I'll tell you this: I used to be a lot angrier when I was in my mid-20s and I was reading a lot. And I was in grad school. I was very angry by about ideas, and I was angry at people that didn't agree with me. And I'll tell you, I'm happier now that I've chilled out a bit. So, use code happiness at checkout. to feel better. But let's get back to some people who are at various levels of happiness.
And it's worse. So imagine that as you do that and you project outward, your margin of error increases. That's absolutely, definitely the case. And at some point, you're certainly on the climate side, the margin of error gets rapidly to the point where it subsumes any estimate of the degree to which the climate is going to transform. And that happens even more rapidly on the economic side.
Potentially,
So,
but right now, I think right now, this is a disagreement on the fact of the matter, though, not the philosophy of what we're talking about in terms of controlling externalities. If we think, I'm curious, let's say that we think we can accurately predict the climate and the economic impact, and we think that the climate impact would be far worse if we don't account for that, both in terms of human
I
conditions
don't believe any of those presumptions. I
Sure,
think
but
they're
then
both
if you
faulty.
don't, but I mean, like, obviously, if I
It's a really interesting argumentative strategy that Destiny's like, let's just say for the sake of argument that we know some stuff about climate science and where that's going to go. And Peterson just gets to say, well, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. And just gets to stop the conversation. Don't do that, guys. Don't do that. Watch a little more, and then I want to skip ahead to something he says, which is great.
agreed with actual analysis, I would probably agree with you on the prescription here too, right? And
Well,
not
I
that like
don't-
none of the climate models were accurate or couldn't accurately predict anything,
They're
then I'd
not
also say why
sufficiently
make
well. They're not sufficiently accurate. That's the first thing. And because they have a margin of error, and it's a large margin of error, they don't even model cloud coverage well. That's a big problem. They don't have the
I
resolution.
did see someone that said, waiting on a valid criticism of Peterson other than I don't like him. I mean, I know since we started this, we talked about his fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between free markets and capitalism. So that's a thing. We talked about his misunderstanding of the relationship between leftist politics and the pharmaceutical industry. So that's the thing we talked about, which I think was, relatively useful. He's currently talking about how environmental policies focused on stopping climate change are going to hurt people. It's factually untrue, and I'm actually going to read some quotes from a book from some climate scientists in a second to show this sort of thing. So, it's a stream. We're still just streaming, but I think there's been a number of valid critiques there. Also, I don't love him. I don't love this guy, if I'm honest. I love his jacket, but I don't love him. But there's some valid critiques to be made.
They don't have resolution to produce the accuracy that's claimed by the climate apocalypse mongers.
People
Not even
keep saying
close.
that, but we just got another one of the hottest years on record. How many times are we going to have another hottest year on record? How many times are we going to have an increase of carbon dioxide concentration?
I mean, this is a great point. Again, Destiny heads. I'm just saying objectively, your guy is making a good point here. I'm glad that he brings this up. It is really ridiculous that whenever you talk to someone who hates climate science, you end up having to say things like this over and over.
In the atmosphere before we're finally like, okay.
I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because it depends. The scientific answer to that question depends precisely on the time frame over which you evaluate the climate fluctuation. And that's actually an intractable scientific problem. So you might say, well, if you take the last 100 years, this variation looks pretty dismal.
And they get into this. I'm going to skip back, so I don't have so much time. But the point Peterson basically makes is like, oh, well, if I just take this period of time, the last 100 years, it might stay whatever. But if I look at a broader thing, there's bigger ups and downs. This is what creationists like to say. And I'm pretty sure Destiny, which is a good thing that he says, is like, yeah, but maybe the difference is since the Industrial Revolution, release of carbon has accelerated at massive levels, and energy use and petroleum extraction have gone up at such a world historical level that maybe there's a reason for that, which is a good point. But I want to skip ahead to a part where Jordan Peterson says that the poor are monsters, which he's wont to say. Let's see if I find the right point.
He has to import it anyways, especially because France has demonstrated that it's possible. We could drive down the cost of energy with low-cost nuclear, and there'd be no carbon production. And then the poor people would have something to eat because they'd have enough energy. And that isn't what's happening. And that's one of the things that makes me extremely skeptical of the entire narrative. It's like two things. The left will sacrifice the poor to save the planet.
The left will sacrifice the poor to save the planet. Again, I'm going to get into this in 2 seconds, but a lot of the writing about climate, I'm reading about it a lot right now for a thing we're working on. It's just not the case. And I don't want to be a Peterson by being like, that's just not the case, because I'll give you some references in a second.
And the left will deindustrialize even at the nuclear level, despite the fact that it devastates the poor. And that's even worse because
I mean, the funny thing about like the notion of deindustrialization hurting the poor. We'll just.
If you devastate
This
the
is good.
poor
This is good. This is good.
and you force them into a short-term orientation, in any given country where starvation beckons, for example, they will cut down all the trees
The
and they
poor-
will kill down all the animals
poor will
and they
kill all
will
the animals.
destroy the
The
ecosphere.
poor will destroy
And so,
it.
even by the standard,
So a couple of things here, right? What a wild thing to say. The poor will cut down all the trees and they'll kill down all the animals and they'll destroy the ecosystem. Of course, the very people he's talking about are the people that are already being drastically affected by climate change, rising oceans, drought, storms, etc. Now, there's some stuff in this book that I'm reading. It's called "Slow Down" by Koi Saito. It's called the DeGrowth Manifesto. This is a Japanese philosopher, really interesting guy, who kind of takes. If we're going to sum up some of his work, and I haven't read all of it, so to be clear, but this guy's deal is he did a huge study of the late work of Marx, like the third volume of Capital that was never finished in his lifetime. And one of his sort of discoveries is that Marx talks about nature and the environment a lot, and the way in which industrialization necessitate the extraction of resources from nature in a way that's going to come home to roost. And this even goes back to Peterson's thing about how like no one in 1890 would know whatever. Well, in like 1850, 1860, whatever, Marx is writing about the problems that will happen with the continued extraction of natural resources from the environment due to the demands of industrialization. And let's see. So in here, he quotes. Oh, let me find the guy's full name. There's a guy named Raworth. Kate Raworth. Rawrth. And Kate Raworth is a political economist. And this is Saito summarizing what she says. So it says, according to Raworth, however, even if some increased resource and energy consumption becomes necessary, and this is talking about basically like, and let me jump up. Sorry. There's someone named O'Neill, great name, who says, when O'Neill examined quality of life relative to environmental damage, his research proved that the more stable a nation's social foundation was, the greater the tendency of that nation to overshoot planetary boundaries. Almost every nation satisfied social demands by sacrificing sustainability. Jumping ahead, it says, according to Raworth, however, even if some increased resource and energy consumption becomes necessary, the additional burden produced by rectifying social injustice is much lower than is commonly assumed. So he's basically saying, like, if you look at the science, there are ways to rectify social injustice and fight poverty that don't involve sort of the perpetuation of unproductive industrial energy mechanisms. And Peterson sets up this dichotomy where it's like an either or. Either you do the environmental thing and the poor all die, or we continue on with rapid energy consumption and production, and the poor don't tear down nature. It goes on to say, using food as an example, increasing the world's overall caloric intake by just 1% would save, I think this is 800 million and 60,000 people from starvation. As another example, around 1.3 billion people do not have access to electricity, but providing them with it would increase overall carbon dioxide emissions by only around 1%. It would take the redistribution of a mere 0.2% of the world's wealth to end the hardship of the 1.4 billion people currently living beneath the world poverty line of $1.25 a day. I'll just read one more line from this. Goes on to say, I'm sorry that I'm reading a book. I know it's not what we're supposed to do. As online content people, we shouldn't be reading books. It says, moreover, though Raworth doesn't address this directly, promoting democracy and gender equality produces no environmental burden at all. Economic equality, too, if realized via the redistribution of subsidies currently spent on the fossil fuel industry, would produce no additional environmental burden. In fact, it would likely improve the environment. I'm just saying. As this line of research shows, the grossly unjust divide between the global north and south could be largely rectified without further damaging the environment, provided we stop clinging to the dream of perpetual economic growth. Right? So the gist there, and I genuinely, this is a really good book. I mean, I haven't finished it. I recommend checking it out. Yeah, this is a book. This is book. See book? This book. This is a book. Pretty cover too. As a book. There's your book, guys. Everyone read book. I'll tease this here too. I'm reading it because we're working on a video project with Yellow Dot Productions, which is Adam McKay's studio. Adam McKay of, Step Brothers, things of that nature. Adam McKay started a production company that makes stuff, put the dome in the hole, about climate. They have some sketches and stuff online. They did a thing with Tim Robinson, but we're going to make a video with them. So I'm really excited about that. I don't know if they have an audiobook of that. John said that book is a beta cuck. Yes, that book's a beta cuck. But I would just say that the gist of sorry, does it give you any data? So here's what I'm gonna say. That there's a point at which you have to trust me that this book is real. You have to trust me that I accurately read from it, and you have to trust that the author cites all of his sources and provides references to them. Now, it would be really boring if what I did is read that, then I went and pulled up the paper referenced, then went through the references there. Okay. This is the great thing about peer review is peer review in academic studies creates an environment where we know that if someone publishes a piece of work, especially a piece of work in like things like economic and data science, that it has been read, consulted, critiqued by people in that field so that it holds a certain standard. And I would encourage you, if you think that sounded bullshitty, check out the book and go from there. But it was a real book. So let's keep watching.
People who are pushing the carbon dioxide externality control, all the consequences of that doctrine appear to me to be devastating even by their own measurement principles. We're trying to fix the environment. Well, boys and girls, doesn't look like it's working. All you've managed to do is make energy 5 times as expensive and more polluting. You were wrong. That didn't work. And I can't understand. You can help me. That's why you're here today talking to me. I can't understand how the left can support this.
Just one quick thing. Let's say that.
And the idea again that like the left, for whatever the left means here, is primarily behind like carbon taxes is not true. Carbon taxing is a completely free market solution to environmental problems. So it's interesting that Peterson talks earlier about the joy of the free market. Well, carbon offset taxing is a free market solution firmly grounded in the mechanisms of capitalism to slow down climate change. It's in no way an attempt to stop it. And I also think it's important to remember, and I think about, this is an important thing to think about. Whenever you hear people like Peterson criticizing what leftists do, here's a dirty secret, guys. And some of you, cover your kids' ears, because I don't want this to hurt anyone's feelings. Leftists don't have any power. There's almost like no leftist in power anywhere. Like in America, we have a few politicians in Congress who are kind of left-leaning. We have one member of Senate, Bernard Sanders, who's left-leaning. We've never had a left-leaning president. There's almost no left-leaning governors or mayors. Most of the famous Democrats in this country, like Rachel Biden, is extremely and vocally pro-capitalist. The influence of the tech and finance industry in the Democratic Party is well documented. So it's important to remember that someone like Peterson in this instance has created an enemy of the radical left, but like the radical left, in so much as it exists, is maybe organizing like local protest, doing some marches against fascism, trying to get a city council seat here or there, working on a mutual aid program, putting together like a comedy show night to raise a couple $1,000s for a medical charity or something. There's not much there. And that's not a critique, to be clear, of people who are political organizers in that space. But there hasn't been a lot of times in American history, at least since like the labor movement, where we had anything that was like a powerful left. Someone said, Wisecrack, what's your political leaning? Never voted. I have 14 dads. I believe that everyone deserves to have a good life. I believe in a fundamental principle of equality, where all people are fundamentally equal in terms of their humanity and their right to experience a good life. And I think we have enough for everyone to have a good life. So there you go. Go ahead, Henry. You were gonna say something, or maybe you're still in cop mode.
Oh no, yeah, I wasn't gonna really say much. I'm not much in cop mode right now. The chat's kind of cooled off, but big agreement about like what you're saying with the left is boogeyman. It feels like Jordan Peterson's just talking about an alternate reality. It feels like a lot of reactionaries are when I hear about like the left and liberals and like liberals being scared of the left and the left being a bully to liberals, and it just sounds like it just sounds made up because I'm like, where's the healthcare? Where's the universal basic income? Where's any kind of movement on housing and like homelessness? I don't see any kind of tangible political goals being met or moved around. It's again just culture war.
Alan Varick Ross says, why do Americans have so much trust in a binary system? I mean, I think for most people, it's not that they have trust, but it's like what we have, you know? I know personally, I don't love that we have, and this is even just like regardless of political ideology, I assume things would be better if we had more options, you know, if there was more than a two-party system. So, yeah, it's dumb that that's the case. Let's skip ahead. We don't have that much time left. Here, let's just make everyone really mad. Let's just do it. I'm gonna throw some fire on the gas. Oh, here we got an ad. We gotta skip the ad. Okay, let's see. Where's the point I'm looking at? And let's start here and see where we go.
Sure.
There are models now of cognitive processing, belief system processing that make the technical claim.
And I'm going to tell everyone this. The thing I'm going to make sure we get to before we wrap, which is the thing that's been pulled a lot, is that Jordan Peterson says that people worried about climate change are analogous to Hitler. He then says that Hitler and his policies, we don't know if they were right or left wing. We just don't know. So I'm going to make sure we get to that. But first,
Belief system does is constrain entropy.
Sure, that's not surprising at all to me.
Okay,
Yeah.
so and now the signal for released entropy, which would be a consequence of, say, violated fundamental beliefs, is a radical increase in anxiety, right? And a decrease in the possibility of positive emotion. And so people will struggle very hard against that, which is exactly the phenomena that you're describing.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree with what you said. Although,
So here's my
so I'm not
issue
sure
of
why
worry.
it's relevant to the issue I was pursuing.
I'm getting.
Fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's my issue. Okay. So when I'm trying to evaluate a situation, I like to think that I have I've got some insulation from the effects of what liberals think or what conservatives think, is because on my platform, I don't necessarily have an allegiance to a particular political ideology. Like right now, I'm like center left to progressive, but I break really hard from progressives on certain issues. I think Kyle Rittenhouse is in the right.
I'm going to rewind for 2 seconds just because we talked about this earlier. So I'm just
conservatives think is because on my platform, I don't necessarily have an allegiance to a particular political ideology. Like right now, I'm like center left to progressive, but I break really hard from progressives on certain issues. I think Kyle Rittenhouse is in the right. I think basically everything you guys are doing with indigenous people is insane, including the complete mass grave hoax. I think that I'm a big supporter of the Second Amendment. I have beliefs where I can break from my side, you know, pretty hardcore because I am not like allegiant to certain political ideology. One thing that worries me with
Okay, but we got to jump ahead to the stuff.
Go
ahead, Henry.
I just think the guns thing, like I know people who are pro-gun and would consider themselves leftist because it falls more along economic, philosophical, ideological needs for like protection than it does like culture war. Like liberals always do X, conservatives always do Y.
Yeah. Okay, let's go. Okay, guys. So this is like, you know, we're all going to be able to agree on the insanity of what's to come.
it wasn't a secret. I don't think that anybody had to guess that he was incredibly anti-Semitic.
Okay, so yeah, so there is, I'll rewind maybe a second because maybe that'll help a little more to get context here. Oh, this is not a very functional thing. Let's see what this is.
Like I feel like if
Some of that's true. And yes, you can adopt that criticism. I think the difference is resentful and miserable right from the time he was, you know, a rejected artist at the age of 16. And so he was working.
The weird thing that people hold on to is the idea that like if Hitler was just a resentful artist and that's why he did everything. You know, a resentful artist I know, basically everyone I know is a failed artist. You know what I mean? Like who among us is not a failed artist? But we're not out here doing
Something was working within him, and something that might well be regarded as demonic whose end goal was precisely what it attained, which was the devastation of hundreds of millions of people, and Europe left in a smoking ruin.
Someone said, do I take Jordan's words out of context or does it go way over my head? Here's all I'm going to say. I'm smart enough to understand what Jordan Peterson says. I'm not concerned about that. He is not so smart, nor am I so dumb that his words go over my head. The only thing that goes over my head is a lack of follicular growth.
And the cover story was the Grand Third Reich. And so there's no reason at all to assume that we're not in exactly the same situation right now.
So again, he thinks that there is a radical left that is in power that is analogous to the Third Reich.
I think there's a great reason to assume. I think that Hitler's motives and everything that he was trying to do wasn't a secret. I don't think that anybody had to guess that he was incredible.
There was problems with this documentary, but Ken Burns did a thing on the Holocaust in America, like an 8-part documentary last year, which, you know, not that Ken, we needed my uncle Ken, not one of my dads, my uncle, to prove this to us. But people very much knew that Hitler was very bad.
Incredibly anti-Semitic. That Aryan supremacy was going to lead to the destruction and the murder of like so many different people in concentration camps. Like none of this was a secret. It's not like he was hiding it.
He hid a lot of it.
I mean, like he tried to maybe hide the death camps, but nobody in Germany was wondering like, wow, crazy the pogroms are happening as Jewish people. That's so crazy. Or wow, they're all being shipped to just mainly the Jews to camps to work. Like that's kind of interesting. Or wow, he talks about this a lot in Mein Kampf, but maybe it's just a coincidence. I don't think you can compare like Hitler to people that are worried about climate change.
Again, and Destiny rephrased this. There's a literal comparison between Hitler and the Third Reich and people that are concerned about climate change. Even if you're someone that doesn't care about climate change, like go hang out with some climate scientists and tell me if you're picking up huge Nazi vibes. I will say that there are huge Nazi vibes in elements of society now, and they're not there. You know, as far as I know, the rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, was not the after party from a client science conference. The men with the tiki torches did not just come from discussing, you know, possible solutions to increased carbon release. I don't think that's what they were there for. I don't think so. But fact check me if I'm wrong.
The worry that I have here is because if we're
Why
applying...
not? He said, Destiny says, he said, oh God. He said, you can't compare climate scientists to Hitler and Third Reich. And he says, why not? I don't know. I could think of a few reasons.
People in Germany thought Hitler was perfectly motivated by the highest of benevolent.
If I were to take this standard of evidence and apply this lens of analysis, couldn't I say the exact same thing about the conservative constellation of belief? They don't want to intervene anywhere in the world because they don't care about the problems there. They're anti-immigration because they hate brown people. Trump wanted to ban Muslims from coming to the United States because he's xenophobic. Conservatives don't want to have taxes to help the poor because they want homeless people to starve and die in the winter. But like, I feel like
some of that's true. And yes, you can adopt that criticism. I think the difference with regards especially to the libertarian side of the conservative enterprise, but also to some degree to the conservative enterprise, is they're not building a central gigantic organization to put forward this particular utopian claim. And so even if the conservatives are as morally addled as the leftists, and to some degree that might be true, they're not organized with the same gigantism in mind.
Back to the gigantism.
And so they're not as dangerous at the moment. Now, they could well be, and they have been in the past, but at the moment they're not. And so, of course, you can be skeptical about people's motivations when they're brandishing the moral flag. Like, you don't get to impose your solution on people using compulsion and force.
Okay, so and a theme of this throughout is like the compulsion and force thing. He's going to get back to Hitler in a second because we always about to get back to Hitler. But I just don't know like what, and you talk about the vaccine stuff more later too. I don't know what the alternative is to that. Like some weird libertarian paradise where no one has to do anything. Like drive the speed limit if you want, but maybe don't. Like if you get vaccinated, maybe I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. But maybe I'm just being a fascist.
There's a doctrine there, which is any policy that requires compulsion and force is to be looked upon with extreme skepticism. Now it's tricky because now and then you have to deal with psychopaths, and they tend not to respond to anything but force. And so there's an exception there that always has to be made, and it's a very tricky exception.
Really into psychopaths.
But look, let me tell you a story, and you tell me what you think about this, because I think it's very relevant to the concern that you just expressed. And I don't believe that the conservatives are necessarily any less tempted by the calling of power than the leftists. That's going to vary from situation to situation. Though I would say probably overall in the 20th century, the leftists have the worst record in terms of sheer numbers of people killed.
The obsession with power and like, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it depends on how we're quantifying
Not
that. I
really.
wouldn't find-
Okay,
yeah,
we'll
I
just
mean,
quantify
sure.
Mao. How's that? Direct death of 100 million people. So, that's a pretty stark fact.
Like, I'm not gonna do the whole thing right now. One could do this. I'm gonna do a little bit of a thing. The only little thing. Never mind. I'm not gonna do the thing.
What were
Henry
you
sighed.
what were you gonna do?
No, that sigh was just like, don't do what you're about to do, Michael. All I was gonna say is that if we're going to say that Mao, or if we're going to say in general, communism or leftism killed X number of people, and to be clear, there are very few active leftists who are like, yeah, fuck yeah, Mao. It's if one then looks at the deaths caused by colonization, imperialism, poverty, under capitalist economies. Once we start doing the thing where we blame an ideology or a set of political ideologies for deaths, then we got to ask some other questions, is all I would say.
Fact. And if we're going to argue about that, well, then we're really not going to get anywhere. So, and
I'm not disagreeing that the Holodomor happened as well. The Soviet Union and
Yes.
China were horrible.
20 to
I mean, I'm not
50
gonna.
million
Yeah, I'm not
people
gonna.
in the Soviet-
I'm not gonna
Yeah,
say
okay.
those were horrible
Well,
things. Yeah, of course.
and
Yeah.
it's a war of.
I'm just saying for World War II, it depends on how much you attribute the war deaths to Nazi Germany, et cetera, et cetera. But sure, like largely speaking, I don't think that the left beat the right because the right wasn't trying. I don't think it's because Hitler's lack of trying led him to kill less people than who ended up dying during the Great Leap Forward or during the industrialization of the Soviet
Yes,
Union.
well, I also think it's an open question still to what degree Hitler's policies were right-wing versus left-wing.
What are we doing? What is he doing?
I mean,
It's an open question.
I feel there's an urge to pathologize or make Hitler's ideology unique to Hitler as a means of just ignoring the possibility that it's still background radiation in the culture or politics of today.
Yeah. Tacky in the chat, I appreciate your support, and I totally understand if you can't handle the JP thing. I promise next week on stream we will not be talking about JP. Whatever we do next week on stream, the vibes are going to be immaculate. Hey, by the way, if you're if you're wanted to set your alarm, we do this every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. Also, if you like this and if you fucks with the kid, consider joining our Patreon. There's links in the description and stuff like that. It helps out a lot when you do. We got a $1 level, so even if you just have $1, even if you're pretty broke, and who isn't broke, you can give us $1 a month, and it helps us a lot. Let's watch a little bit. We might go a few minutes over today, friends. Henry, are you cool to go a few over?
Yeah.
You can say no. Okay, cool.
And no one's done the analysis properly yet to determine that.
Well, what do we
He
consider?
said no one's done the analysis proper to determine whether Hitler was on the right or the left. This is the problem again. People point out in the chat, framing every single political and social and military debate and that's ever happened as either this or that. Like, imagine if you went to a restaurant and had like 90 things on the menu and you were like, everything is one of two things. Everything is either a taco or a spaghetti. Is this a taco or a spaghetti? And you're just like, oh, this is a pilaf. It's a pilaf. And you're like, but is a pilaf more of a taco or a spaghetti? Just like, there's other stuff. There's other stuff. Now I'm yelling. I'm sorry, guys. That was a bad vibe. Peace and love.
Socialist movement for a reason. And the socialist part of it.
The dumbest thing in the world is like, the Nazis were leftist because the word socialist was in the party description.
It wasn't accidental.
Well, but there was no, cooperatively.
Like, no one in the band Stone Temple Pilots were pilots. You know what I'm saying? Like, just because something's in a name, that was weak. But you know what I'm saying? Shout out to anyone who's old enough to remember Stone Temple Pilots.
Formed businesses that were owned by all of the people for the people and distributed to the people. And I don't think redistribution was high on Hitler's list of things to do for.
That's true.
I don't think redistribution was high on Hitler's list. Okay, we're gonna skip ahead. He keeps going down this path, and it's not good. We got to get to one of the wildest things that JP says. And for all the JP heads in the chat, we'll fact check this one. Oh, we got to skip past a commercial. Let's see if I can scroll back a little more.
I think it was an Adam Curtis documentary that really helped me understand this, and I think it would help a lot of people if they just consider the idea that World War II wasn't necessarily about ending fascism. It was more fascism deciding if it was going to carry forward in a business suit or a military uniform.
Yeah, 100%. Everyone should watch Adam Curtis. I think we have to watch the last 2 seconds
The
of
Jordan
this
B.
dumb
Peterson
ad.
podcast
I'm sorry.
and get a whole month free
don't
right
do
now.
this.
Just
Don't
go
do
to
whatever this is.
listing.com/Jordan.
Don't go to
and use code
listing.com.
Jordan at
Don't
checkout.
use code
That's
Jordan.
listing.com/Jordan and use
Don't
code
do
Jordan
it.
at
You
checkout
better not.
today.
You go to that link. I'm gonna come into your house and I'm
Forgotten.
gonna.
And that was used
What do you
as
mean
an
none of it?
excuse
What
to-
do you make of the excess deaths?
that for related
Okay, so he says Peterson said that the excess deaths in Europe are up 20% because of mRNA
to
vaccines.
vaccines, there are almost none. The mRNA vaccines have been administered
Excess
for
deaths
related
in
to
Europe.
vaccines.
We don't know.
Absolutely
No,
not.
no.
We
We don't know.
absolutely know. We absolutely.
Wait
This
a
is like
sec. What do
settled
we know?
science.
What do we know?
Okay, so he says excess deaths are up 20%. Might have gone before there. I did some research on statistics. In January 2024, excess mortality in the EU decreased significantly to 3.6 above the baseline. This is from the website Eurostats, compared with 9.5% in December 2023. Let's see. In January 2024, excess mortality continued to vary across the EU. Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Lithuania, Croatia, Luxembourg, Slovakia, Poland, Latvia, and Czechia recorded no excess deaths. And yeah, and then there's another article, and this one's from Politico. And I'm just going to read the headline. This is on Politico. It's under healthcare. It was published last year, but EU excess deaths back to pre-pandemic levels. New data marks significant movement as countries weigh whether COVID-19 pandemic is significantly over. So all that to say is, go to Eurostat, check it out for yourself. He makes wild claims that are just untrue. Like you can just Google it and it's not true. And the claim here is that mRNA vaccines cause a bunch of death and they're killing a bunch of people. It gets real insane at the end here. The end, there's still like almost an hour left when he gets into this sort of stuff, and he yells some more about how leftists are on the side of pharmaceutical companies. So let's go back. Let's skip ahead to that because that's pretty fun. And he starts yelling a lot.
More likely to cause myocarditis or pericarditis?
Yes,
That was
I
a
don't
totally-
think the data suggests support that presupposition anymore. The latest peer-reviewed studies show that that's simply not true, especially among young men.
So there is an age bracket of young men where the elevated rate of myocarditis, acute myocarditis from the vaccine, might have been higher, but we're talking about like 3 or 4 cases per 100,000 people. And again, myocarditis, pericarditis are generally acute conditions.
Well,
They don't last for very
beginning.
long.
I told you at the beginning of this conversation that the progressive leftists were on the side of the pharmaceutical companies.
It's not about being on the side of the pharmaceutical companies. It's about
Really?
Again, the progressive leftists are on the side of the pharmaceutical companies. Yeah, Mom, I just came back from my Democratic Socialists of America meeting. We're raising money for Merck because we fuck with the pharmaceutical company. Sorry, it's just that it's an incoherent thing to say.
really, yeah. It's
Yeah, well,
about,
I
like-
see. So what I see as the unholy part of that alliance with the pharmaceutical companies is that it dovetails with the radical utopians' willingness to use power to impose their utopian vision.
The radical utopians using power to impose their utopian vision.
Well, then what do you
Because
make of the
otherwise,
fact
how
that-
would you explain it? Because the leftists should have been the ones that were most skeptical about the bloody pharmaceutical companies.
The left.
And they jumped on the vaccine bandwagon in exactly the same way that you're doing right now.
Pharmaceutical companies have helped us tremendously
Yeah,
throughout the.
right. There we go. Fine. No,
think modern
I don't
medicine
think
hasn't?
so. No, I don't think
Then
so.
you're just
I
wrong.
think they're
You're
utterly
completely wrong.
I see. So you don't think that the pharmaceutical companies who dominate the advertising landscape with 75% of the
He's not wrong that it's the pharmaceutical companies are bad and the advertising is bad.
funding are corrupt.
I don't. Corrupt is a
Corrupt.
very broad.
No, it's
Do you think that?
targeted.
Do you think that pharmaceutical?
Corrupt
Do you think
with
they,
a tinge of malevolence,
Do you think
willing to extract money out of people by
This is why I don't like debating guys. People just start yelling. It's such a bad vibe. You know, I could die at any day.
I
Do I want
mean,
the last day of my life to just be like getting yelled at? No way.
if he's so against
That's an interesting point, Henry. So you're saying, but I think if that happened, Henry, we would be ceding power to the government to run healthcare, and their utopian vision would put microchips in all of us or something like that. Well, it's a little bit more
putting their
yelling.
health on.
do
You don't
think
believe
that we,
that?
Do you think that we get effective drugs from pharmaceutical companies?
Not particularly.
That response is so good. Do you think we get effective drugs from pharmaceutical companies? Not particularly. Didn't he almost like? I mean, it seems like never. I was gonna make a benzos joke, but I won't.
Okay. Do you think that any vaccines work?
Yes.
Do you think that any?
I don't think 80 of them work at once for babies.
What is he on about with that?
Guys, he goes on a whole thing about how we give babies 80 vaccines. As a new father, who is a woke libtard who's vaccinating my child, it's not 80. It's nowhere near 80. It's a few. A few of them take multiple doses, but it's just a few things. That's it. It's a few. It's not 80.
I think that's a little risky.
But yet we've been on this vaccine schedule for how many decades?
Like
and babies
this,
don't.
like this, not like this, not carefully.
I had a ton of vaccines when I was a child. I'm pretty sure that was the norm for people. There were a ton of vaccines you had to
There's
take.
way more now.
There's way more now. No, there's not.
Okay.
I love the exasperation.
And you think
Well,
that
and you can understand why. I mean, look, part of it, no doubt, part of it is a concept.
Okay. You know, obviously you guys can watch all. I want to make sure we end on one particular note. Before we watch this last clip, I will say thanks for hanging out watching. Special thanks to everyone who came through for the first time. Really appreciate it. Appreciate, you know, all the Destiny heads who hung out with us. I hope you know that just because I might not agree with your boy on everything doesn't mean that we're not out here hating. You know, I'm not trying to get involved in fisticuffs. Everyone knows that I do have a type of toxic masculinity that comes from being an older millennial. We all know that toxic masculinity means that I do sometimes fantasize about having a physical fight with Jordan Peterson, and that's not good. And I've confessed that it's not good, and I'm not proud of it. If he was in this room, do I think I could change his life for the worse? I do think that, but that's a bad thought to have. And it's important that we can acknowledge things like this with each other. Let's watch this last little bit. Again, please subscribe and all that stuff.
Left,
Exactly.
by the way.
to some extent, sure, it can be. Or a problem with the right that's far too forgiving of Donald Trump. But I would say that tat part, you can call it justice. I think justice is a perspective of force, right? Where some people might consider a force to be just, the cop that arrests the murderer, and other people might consider that force, that tat, to actually be injustice because the murderer was responding to environmental conditions, blah, 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 or was
That's
or
a
whatever.
stupid theory, that responding to environmental conditions theory. Because
well, I mean,
here's why it's not.
Well, I mean, because essentially that's Rittenhouse's self-defense is
here's
responding
why.
with.
There's two lessons you can learn from that. One is identify with the abuser.
Oh wait.
The other is
sorry. 1 second.
don't.
Never gonna-
Right. Exactly.
Environmental conditions, blah blah blah, or was
That's
or
a
whatever.
stupid theory. That responding to environmental conditions theory. Because
I mean,
here's
it
why
depends.
it's no, it's not.
Well, I mean, because essentially that's Rittenhouse's
Hold on. The computer keeps messing up. I just gotta. How do I get to the clip I want? It's not. I'm not trying to watch this one. But
environmental conditions, blah blah blah, or was
that's
or
a
whatever.
stupid theory. That responding to environmental conditions theory. Because
I mean,
here's
it
why
depends.
it's no, it's not.
Well, I mean, because essentially that's Rittenhouse's
Okay, well, thank you so much, guys, for hanging out with us today. This has been Wisecrack Live. Really appreciate you all. You know, like the stream if you haven't. We really appreciate you for being here. Please do consider, you know, coming back, hanging out, stuff like that. We liked having you here, even though it got a little crazy, but I genuinely, you know, really appreciate that. We got a video coming out about free speech on Friday. I think if you are interested in this conversation today, I think that you will like the video we have coming out on Friday that gets into some of the stuff around free speech debates. Really appreciate you all quite a lot. So good to see so many of you here. Thanks for all the people that gifted memberships. Thanks for those of you that did super chats. It means a lot to us and we really appreciate it. We also do a Monday stream as well, so feel free to check that out. It was good to see all you here today. You know, come find us on Twitter and stuff. So for anyone who's asking, we normally only stream till 12 because I got to go make a video. So we're not trying to just like run away or whatever. But we got to go do some other stuff. Someone asked, we do interviews on stream someday. Giannis Varoufakis would friggin' rip. I would love it if he was on here. But we'll have some more people back. We've done interviews in the past. I got an email from, what's her name? Jill Stein. I got an email from Jill Stein's person today. Gunsmoke, thank you for hanging out. I really appreciate all the Destiny fans who just kicked it and hung out and let me talk my shit. I hope you noticed for most of that entire thing, we were just kind of, you know, talking about Peterson was wrong and Destiny was asking some good questions. I don't know if anyone knows and Destiny. Would love to chat with him if he wants to talk. I'll talk to anyone as long as the vibes are good. Okay. But I have corporate overlords that said if I don't start filming videos soon, that they're gonna kill me. They said they might kill
Oh
me.
no.
I think they might kill me.
You have
Eric,
to
we
get back
did
to
it.
the content
We did it.
mines.
We did it. Thanks to all the friends. Check out the Patreon. Thanks to Henry. Give Henry some love in the chat. And it's okay that you didn't realize I've always been bald. I promise I'm not sick. I might be sick, but if I'm sick, it's not in a bald way. I'm gonna go try to not get killed. I would talk to whoever. But let's go. See you guys soon. Thanks for hanging out. Much love to you and yours.
Thanks for hanging, chat. Have a good weekend. We'll see you Monday.